Welcome to The Real Story. My name's Daniel Hapney. I'm here with the great Mr. G Edward Griffin. And we came here to Washington, D.C. Well, I got to ask, Mr. Griffin, why are you here? What brought you to this wonderful capital of our nation?
Well, Daniel, I came here to talk before the Freedom Rally, the Freedom March rally here, and talk to all of these members of the Constitutional Underground and the supporters of Ron Paul.
Excellent. You know, I was hoping that with this opportunity with you, we could discuss things like, well, let's say the fiat monetary system we utilize, fractional reserve banking, and maybe even a little bit on the Federal Reserve. Probably maybe warm up before your speech, or I don't know what you're going to speak to the crowd with, but my listeners and my viewers, they probably don't have a good grasp. They all haven't had the opportunity to read The Creature from Jekyll Island. Now, I'm going to try to bring that to them in one form or another, but since I have the author with me, I thought, gee, I could start off with, could you tell our viewers a little bit about this private bank that creates our currency?
Well, time is, of course, very limited, and normally I can talk for days on this topic and then only scratch the surface. All that's by way of an excuse of not going to be able to say anything very succinct. But I think that the most important thing for people to know about the Federal Reserve who have not studied it is that the Federal Reserve is not a government agency. That comes as a big shock for a lot of people.
I know, everybody says federal, so
yeah,
they think right away.
As part of the cover. But it's not a government agency. In fact, what it is, it's a cartel. It's no different than a sugar cartel or a banana cartel or an oil cartel. This happens to be a banking cartel, which means it's an association of the largest banks in the country who come together for the purpose of promoting their own industry. And they want it to look like a government agency. And in fact, they do have some authority and some power, which makes it very easy to believe that it's a government agency, because you see what happened is when they formed and they had the Federal Reserve Act passed in 1913, they went to Congress and they actually, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that they purchased Congress. They purchased congressmen and senators. They gave them very attractive financial reasons to support the Federal Reserve Act. What the act really is nothing but the cartel agreement that the bankers drew up among themselves. They said, how are we going to perpetuate our industry? How are we going to pass our losses on to the taxpayer? How are we going to make sure that nobody has any alternative to using our system and our money? And they said, the only way we can do that is to take our agreement and pass it into law. And so the Federal Reserve Act, when you read it, is nothing but a cartel agreement which was passed into law, which means that that people now have to obey the cartel or they go to jail. What a nifty arrangement, you see. Most people don't realize that. I didn't realize it before I started to study.
This is almost like a government-controlled monopoly then, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's not a government-controlled monopoly. It's a privately controlled monopoly. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, people,
it's privately controlled, but it has the appearance of being the government. The only way the government gets into it is they enforce the agreements.
And also they get to utilize the currency when it's first produced, having its greatest purchasing power, right?
Very good, Daniel, very good. The reason that one of the reasons that Congress is willing to do this, because they get cut in on the deal, you see. They have a very good motivation, an incentive, and that is that they can go to the Federal Reserve if they're running out of money and they don't want to raise it from the taxpayers, which they don't want to do because, not in taxes. They get it from the taxpayers through inflation, but they don't want to do it through taxes because that's more obvious. So they go to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve literally just creates the money out of nothing, out of thin air. And then they go through this hocus pocus of lending it to the federal government at interest. Well, they didn't lend it. There was nothing there to lend. They just created it. That's the word that should be kept in mind. They create the money, and then they charge a service fee for creating it, and they call it interest, but it's not really interest. So it's a lot of hidden stuff that the average person doesn't realize and is not going to realize by studying the textbooks or listening to the news, because they keep that pretty well hidden from the people.
The other thing, it's funny when you say hidden and stuff, most of my listeners, they think inflation. It's this gray, cloudy thing that they don't understand that well. And every now and then I'll talk to them and I'll say things like, well, it's not the price of gas going up, it's the purchasing power of your currency going down. And for my listeners, I say, well, gee, if their parents grew up in this little town community of Sharon, and when they grew up in Sharon, what did a house cost 50 years ago? And I ask my listeners, I say, well, did a house have a roof? You know, did it have doors, windows, a heating system, running water, a functioning toilet? And they go, yeah, it had all those things. And I go, does it have all those things today? And the only difference in this, quote, cost of house is the amount of these units we exchange for said house.
Well, that's it exactly. And the amount of money that you have to spend for a house today, that same house, if you didn't spend it on the house, you could go out and buy a huge market basket worth of goods and so forth. That market basket is no bigger today than it was if you took the money back in 1910, let's say, or 20, and instead of buying the house, you went out and bought the same market basket. You'd buy the same things with a smaller amount of money. So you see, the house really isn't worth anything more today than it was then in terms of purchasing power, in terms of other commodities.
Excellent. You know, the other one I tried, and I'm not sure the gentleman who told this, but I really like the analogy, and for you viewers and listeners, the analogy goes like this. If in 1963 I had 3 US dimes, which I believe were 90% silver back then, that the purchasing power was enough to get a gallon of gasoline. And so for you motorists and viewers and people that utilize gasoline, if they still had those 3 1963 or before dimes that were 90% silver, they'd have enough value in their hand, okay, real intrinsic value, just based on the commodity silver in this case, to buy a gallon of gasoline.
That's right. So the price of gasoline has not gone up.
If anything, you'd consider it going down because our productivity, we can now research, we can find, refine all that better.
So all this business about, oh, the prices are going up, the prices are going up, and you hear politicians talk about that a lot. They're just doing that to divert attention away from the real cause, which are the politicians themselves and the Federal Reserve System, which are inflating the currency. They don't want you to think about that. They want you to think about those bad oil companies and those bad landlords.
Well, exactly. Keeping the fingers pointed, look the other way.
That's it.
Now, here we are at a nation's capital, and I think of one of our previous presidents. I think his name was Jefferson, who said something to the effect of, if we ever were to allow a central bank or a private bank to create and control our currency, that our children would wake up as, well, homeless on the lands that their forefathers conquered.
That's it exactly, yes.
And we're watching that now. We're watching it, I don't know what I see watching, but hey, tell us a little about your book. So maybe, you know, I actually gave your book to a neighbor of mine, an MIT graduate from the 60s, great gentleman, Mr. Bruce Norian. And Bruce, anyway, after reading it, came back to me and just said, wow.
Well, that's really great for me to hear, you know, and I wrote that thing. It's 600 pages, as you know. I finished it. In fact, I really didn't finish the book. I had another box full of notes, a Hope Banker box full of notes. I was going to do some more chapters, and I looked at the 600 pages and said, you know, this is too much as it is. I just have to stop it here, because if they don't get the picture by now, they're never going to get it. So, hey, they're singing the Star Spangled Banner. Tuned up here. They want me speaking
Mr.
in a minute.
Maybe I'll catch you a little bit later, sir.
Okay,
Thank you.
Daniel.
Thank you. Stay with health.
So you see, prices really haven't gone up. Gas hasn't gone up. Housing hasn't gone up. Groceries have not gone up. The fact is that the value of the dollar is going down, and that's a result of the Federal Reserve System. That's a result of the scam, and you are the victim because that means you're losing your purchasing power. Every dollar that you earn, every dollar that you invest, every dollar that you put in some kind of a monetary or dollar-denominated investment, whether it be a savings account or an insurance policy or a retirement fund, anything that's based on dollars, every day that passes, a little bit of that value is chiseled away. It's like going into the casino. You know that when you put that quarter or that dollar into the slot machine, you may win now and then, but overall, a certain percentage of every amount of your bet is taken by the house. A certain percent every time you pull the handle. Every time you make an investment or a financial transaction in America today, this giant Federal Reserve casino, they take a little percentage of your money. And the longer you stay in that game, the more they take from you. So that at the point, at the end of your productive lifetime, after, say, 40, 50, 60 years of earning your money, they have taken about 98% of it. And you don't even know it, or many people don't even know. They think it's inflation. They think the money just went up to heaven someplace. No, it didn't go up to heaven. It went to the federal government and to the banks that are partners in the Federal Reserve System. So that's how you are the victim. They're stealing money from you. Okay, my 10 minutes are about up. Now, I'll end as I began. The Federal Reserve System is the greatest scam in history, and you are the victim. But now, what are we going to do about it? Al? Yes. I'm going to take this whole topic and condense it down even further to just 4 words. Abolish the Federal Reserve.